So, I've always had very, very, very deep and strong feelings towards this guy, and very deep emotional attachment to him. And I feel like for a pretty long time, I didn't understand why. And I used to fight it off. The feelings, the love, because it made me uncomfortable, how strong it was. So I tried to push the feelings away. But that only made my connection to him go further and further and further into my psyche. And so recently I've been doing a lot of self-therapy and observation of my own unconscious brain and the way my mind has been using the image of him to represent my own inner child. And so again, I would always get frustrated at the fact that I would pray for him unwillingly, and I felt like I would carry him in my spirit everywhere, and that I would just have this all-consuming desire to love him more than anything, more than myself, more than life. And I can never understand why, because there's no physical evidence of him being with me, and I can't get him out of my head. No matter how hard I try, I even got to the point of realizing that whatever version of him that does exist in my subconscious isn't the real him. That is just a version of him that is a collection of all my own experiences of fascination and fantasy about what he would be like, or what he could be like, maybe what he should be like. But all of that isn't reality. So I had to kind of give up whatever meaning of him that I attached to my memory. I sort of let it go. It is a Thursday and it is 1:57 a.m. Going back to what I was talking about, I would do everything that I could to try to get him out of my mind, but it was like I had no control over it. And so eventually my awareness had increased to the point of me realizing that somehow I had attached the image of him to what I believe is my inner child. The relationship that I have with him in my subconscious mind is my experience of my own inner child. Every day that goes by and I can't get him out of my head, and every day I'm having this version of him that exists only in my imagination, but the personality of this version of him is like a traumatized child, which is one by itself interesting that my inner child is a he, because the pronouns that I identify with is she, but in my unconscious, my inner child is a boy, and he is represented by the image, the symbol of this man, right? This guy that I have all these deep feelings with. And mind you, I'm coming to all of these realizations through, again, this sort of self-therapy, self-observation, increasing my own awareness of my own reality. And so going back to that original stream of thought where I was saying that the personality of him is like a traumatized child, and in my mind he acts like a little boy who has been psychologically abused, and neglected, and he needs a lot of attention. It's amazing because the role that I play in my own experience of him as my inner child is that of a mother. The relationship I have with my inner child is like being a mom. And every day I have to tend to this version of myself in my head that looks like this guy that I have feelings with. And I can't turn it off because I'm not in control of it. Ultimately, the only thing I really can control is how I respond and react to the experience that my mind is giving me, and whether I allow the expression of him as my inner child to be something that guides me and heals me and liberates me from all of the trauma that ultimately is creating this personality of him in my head. And I think what I find the most fascinating about it is that I used to think that the inner child was something that I could only find within the evidence of my physical world, the external plane, that I could only find the personality of my inner child within the actions that I took as an individual in the relationships that I had. But when I'm sitting here and I'm observing the state of being that I'm in while I'm having this sort of simulation type experience of him in my head, right, the guy that I like, I'm realizing like, whoa, the way he's acting is a reflection of my own hidden trauma. And how did I come to this realization? I was watching this movie called Earthquake Bird on Netflix. It's a pretty decent movie. I was at the part where these two women are having a conversation, and one of the girls, she asks her friend, like, what's your star sign? And her friend's like, oh, I don't believe in any of that, yada yada yada. The girl like guesses her sign and it's right, and then she's like, okay, well, I read tarot cards and I read palms and I see things like images, and sometimes when I'm at work, because she's a bartender, and she's like, so like when I'm at work, I have to be careful with looking at people's palms because I see things. And I had to pause the movie because I read tarot cards, but I hadn't ever really seriously considered the fact that it's possible I could also read palms. I read images and I read people, and I am able to sense a deeper meaning in pretty much everything that I come into contact with. But I hadn't ever, seriously thought, is it possible that I could read palms? And then ever tried. Not since I started isolating my psychic sensory in order to increase my ability to use it and have it be my strongest sense, and to sort of master the art of reading things intuitively. So I put the movie on pause, and then I look at my palm. And it's interesting the way that reading psychically, that psychic sensory works, because sometimes it doesn't work in a logical way. Especially for me personally, I can't take an initial statement and judge what the reading is about based on that. So the first thing that I say is something along the lines of the memories that you have of a person, or the memories that you have of a thing isn't true to what really happened. And I'm like, okay, palm reading is already going in an interesting direction. Like, so after that, I was reading from my palm another sort of intuitive message that was like a line of communication that's inconsistent. For example, if you talk to somebody like on the phone and then like months go by and you don't talk to them, and then you talk to them again, and then more months go by and then you talk to them again. And I had this major epiphany. And it's almost incredible that I hadn't ever fully acknowledged this before. I guess because I just wasn't ready. Maybe like the universe was waiting for me to try to read my own palm before I could get to this point in my self-discovery process or my self-healing process, where I realized, oh my gosh, all of the father figures that I had ever been introduced to in my life all are connected to some kind of psychological abuse that I have, some kind of psychological trauma that I have in relation to masculine, dominant, authoritative figures. And I had forgot, honestly, that for a very large time in my life, this man who was supposed to be my stepfather ended up being like a pathological liar, you know. I remember going years and years and years of my life believing that he was one way, and then this moment comes where I somehow have to accept as a child that all of the memories I have of someone are a lie. And that for a long time in my life, I didn't even remember that I had gone through that. So this is like present. Yeah, this is happening deep in my like subconscious still, in the workings of the way that I view men that I perceive as paternal. And then my biological father, right, he was always absent. And he would show up and then disappear, and then show up and then disappear, and then show up and then disappear. And not just that, but he would also make promises as he would show up and then disappear and then make more promises. And, you know, the cycle would just go on. And then on top of that, you add the abuse that comes from molestation. And then on top of that, you have the trauma that comes from feeling neglected by your maternal figure. And that just really takes a toll, man. You know, I'm just briefly talking about it because I want to give just a general idea of all of the things that are cultivating the personality of my inner child, and how this has completely impacted my experience of this guy, just because he's the image of my inner child. I have had to be willing to create the relationship with him as a mother that I didn't have as a child. And in my mind, he loves me like a son would, and he acts like a son would. Also, everything in my life is connected. Like, I can have a major revelation about something and have it connect to something that I just probably haven't even thought about for like 2 years. But it brings everything around to full circle. And my entire life ends up being this divinely guided and divinely planned course of events. So there's that. But what I also find interesting is that I have been able to have a healthy relationship with him, my inner child. You know, I've learned to stop defying the image of this guy in my head and the way that he appears in my head, and started allowing the subconscious to work for my highest good, and to believe that the experience I'm having in my own psyche is for my highest good, even though I can't control it and I want it to stop because I can't stop thinking about him. And I can't control the love that I have for him, or the way that he is portrayed in my mind, and the way that my mind is asking me to relate myself to him. I've had to completely alter the way I treat myself, the way I talk to myself, and the way I think about the world that I live in. Me viewing our relationship as sort of child mother has somehow allowed me to understand the inner workings of my own psyche and the relationship between masculine and feminine energy, and how it works, and how I have the ability to be both my own force of masculinity and also play a feminine role in my own mind. Because anything that's in your mind is you. I started thinking about it even deeper, and I'm like, well, okay, so listen, if all is one and the image of the self is universal, and all the images that exist within the mind are universal, then that means even though I'm having this experience of this guy in my psyche, like in my unconscious, even though this is a personalized experience to the universe, it is the nature of my reality. And this kind of relates a little bit back to when I was saying earlier that this version of him I can't get away from. That even though this is my experience of him in my mind, him being physically present in my life would create the exact same experience. And that I could not get away from how our connection is portrayed in my own mind. Even though outside of my mind, he is someone else. He has a life, he has other friends, he has a life. He has a life, okay? That there is a reality beyond my own imagination, but that I would always be sort of bound to the way he has expressed to me, the way my love is expressed for him, the meaning of our connection and the purpose and what it means will always be bound to the way it exists to me in my subconscious, no matter what. If, like I said, everything in the mind is sort of universal, and that if we are all one, and that if this is the true nature of my reality, then if in my mind, if in my reality, he is the image of my own inner child, then that means in his mind, he would also be the image of his inner child. I would play the same role in his mind that I play in my mind. The way he would perceive me psychologically is that of a mother, because that would be the way it is programmed into the subjective mind of the universe. And then I started thinking like, okay, well, one, that's very deep. That completely changes the way that I feel about him and also about our connection, because then I realized that if he is going to psychologically only ever perceive me as a maternal force, then that means that is the impact that I'm having on his inner child. In the most high intent, our connection is intended to heal him. That would allow him to heal his trauma, just as in my mind, the image of him has allowed me to heal my trauma by gifting me the ability to act as a maternal force in my own reality. And then I started thinking like, okay, well, is that what they call soulmates? Like, what if the cause of such a term, or the experience of true love, is actually two individuals who share an inner child, and that they each possess masculine and feminine energy, but when it comes to their connection, right, and the inner child, they only play the role of one So, for example, the woman would play the feminine role, the maternal role of healing this inner child that they share. And the masculine, right, the man, he would play the paternal role. And that these energies would interact in order to co-create an experience where they are able to share the expression of health by aligning, I guess, with the subconscious experience of being one, of sharing the same wounds. This connects to the yin and yang, because I also study this a lot. It is pretty much the core, this idea that there can be a singular force that appears to act as two, although it is one. Like masculine and feminine, they appear to be two, although they are one. When we see two individuals who share an inner child, on the outside they just seem like a perfect pair, but they ultimately are like bound to this experience that is out of their control, because subconsciously they are connected to the same definition of love, or they have the same exact trauma because they share the same psyche. You know, it's really interesting. So that's where I am in my life. Figuring out that the love I feel for this guy is much deeper than I thought. And then I started, really allowing myself to become fully aware of the experience that I've been having of him and how deeply it would impact him. The existence of me and his psyche, and the fact that when you realize that a version or the image, the symbol of a person that exists in the subconscious is fully based on memory, that it has a mind of its own, that it is a collection of experiences over time, and that I realized that in his mind I would be animated in a way that portrays to him a motherly figure, and that just really opened my heart to the connection more, to really seeing the value of the connection, and like no longer being angry at the universe for making me love this man as my own inner child. And that if I stop loving him, then I feel like I'm dying inside. That the image of him turns almost demonic. It starts throwing a fit. I become extremely upset all the time and on edge, and that's when the self-destructive thought patterns kick in, because now I am creating the same experience of trauma that was literally given to me as a child. And the whole point of him existing in my psyche is so that I would be able to reverse that process by learning all of the things that trigger him, learning all of his needs and his wants, and which are ultimately all of my triggers. All of my needs, all of my wants, and I learn how to tend to those, and it creates this beautiful harmony within. And I feel peace when I align with the way the universe is trying to get me to see this man, And when I truly allow the interpretation of the experience that exists in my mind to be gifted to me by greater intelligence, it really allowed me to see the value in the connection. And honestly, it's the most important connection that exists currently in my life. And I just started thinking of him. Now I can only think of him as my inner child. But it feels like home, it feels like sanity, because the ability to understand and experience that is happening unconsciously, kind of out of your control. The ability that we have to understand it is based on this concept of lucidity, of consciousness, and awareness. How conscious you can become of the true nature of your own mind and the intelligence that it has, the ability it has to create an entire personality of a person in your head and then call it your inner child, and have that entire personality be based on all of the experience you've had of your environment, and then set it in motion and have it interact with you in your own imagination and provide a deeper meaning to that experience in your own imagination that is ultimately intended to help you heal all of the damage caused to your brain because of the environment that's created this personality that has a mind of its own. And I felt like I realized that the whole point was that I'm no longer enslaved by my own duality, this double-mindedness that exists within the human because of a lack of connection to the meaning of subconscious experiences and the tendency we have to be destructive and decide to bury our emotions and neglect ourselves and neglect the experiences that exist unconsciously because we have learned the abusive behaviors of our oppressors. I just recently started studying political science because I am aiming for a Juris Doctor, a degree in law, for a lot of reasons, honestly. But right now in my studies, this is an independent study, so I'm not like admitted to college or anything because it's sort of against my beliefs to be a part of the system. But my studies are independent and I intend to follow this course all the way through and treat it as if I am admitted into a college because I'm, that connected with the passion I have for law. And I really like how Doctor of Law sounds. It just has a nice ring to it. It resonates. But beyond that, I genuinely, this is our life. This is our environment. This is our government. And I think that it's really important for me to really allow the universe to guide my study of law into the mind of our government. And before I had got to this point, I took a really long time of just studying nature's law. Again, independent study based on self-observation, studying my own psyche, all of my own experiences, my own thought patterns, my own traumas, and just really journaling and a lot of thorough examination and questions that are fundamental that I realize, me impressing questions onto my own mind, that it works continuously, and I'm thinking that, I just ask myself a question or I contemplate or consider a very, very deep question about the nature of the human mind or the nature of reality or the cause of a thing, and that question can end up being answered in a way that I didn't expect 2 years from now. And a question that I asked myself in 2020 is just now being answered in a way that is completely different than the original answer I got. You know what I mean? And I started to understand how philosophy works, what it means to be a philosopher. And I didn't really see myself in that way until I began studying law. I guess I should be more specific, until I started studying politics. But like I was saying before that, I had took 2 to 3 years of just doing a deep, thorough observation of nature, human nature, the mind and its capacity to be universal, and the relationship between the masculine and the feminine, life and death, good and bad, light and dark, and how that eventually evolved into where I am now. And right now I'm reading Politics by Aristotle. I can read this book and completely understand every point that he's making, in a way that a lot of his points, are based on the law of nature and the natural order of things. And I had been already studying the law of nature and the natural order of things. So it's incredible that a lot of what Aristotle is talking about somehow was also connected to the revelations that I'm having in my about my own psychological process of thought, my own psychological makeup, and somehow that relates to the way the structure of our government is, and how it is the manifestation of nature. Okay, I think I'm gonna bring this episode to a close, and I believe this is the end. So I'll see you next time. And this is the podcast, about everything, something, and nothing.